You're listening to episode 50 of the Confident Writer podcast with Jane Pike. 50? Wow, knocking it out of the ballpark. Today's topic is a really cool one, and we are going to chat all about intuition. I'm going to give you 3 different ways that I believe you can develop your intuition or kind of tap into your intuitive sense. The motivation for this came from a few different places. So the first one was a question in my Joyride membership group on the Stable Hours thread. So Stable Hours is one of the weekly Q&As that we have. And this particular question asked, what is the difference between intuition, emotion, and feeling? And I thought, isn't that such a great question? It might have even been, what's the difference between intuition and emotion? But I kind of tapped feeling in there on my answer. And then a few days later, I was doing a Facebook Live session on my Confident Writer Facebook page, all about the Masterson method and particularly the bladder meridian technique, which is one of the kind of foundational moves, if you like, of that particular technique. And one of the conversations that got sparked on that thread was all about intuition, but specifically how challenging some people find it to actually follow their own impulses or essentially trust themselves. I think that's what it comes down to. And my observations on that particular train of thought is that so often we do treat everything that we involve ourselves in as a pass-fail test. So if we get our horses out and we want to play at liberty, for instance, or we're trying something new like that bladder meridian technique, we feel this pressure to get it right, and we don't really give ourselves the grace of understanding that probably the first time or the first many times that you do anything, you're literally paving the way forward for developing your feel, developing your timing, developing your understanding of what it is you're doing, and developing the conversation between you and your horse. And it feels like such a limiting paradigm to be operating from, that we are putting on top of that this pressure to get it right, whatever right means. And that pass-fail test kind of approach, which I think is so applicable, is rampant. It's like it's gone viral. We really feel like we need to get stuff right. And if we don't get stuff right, even if we're not actually sure what right looks like, then we either give up or we freeze or we lose that sense of following your curiosity. What I want to begin with is that definition of what intuition is and what emotion is and what feeling is, because I think this is a territory that we're not very adept at navigating in terms of our understanding, and they're definitions that aren't necessarily clear to us. And it may even be, for so many of us, that this particular framework of intelligence, so our instinctual intelligence, our intuitive intelligence, and our emotional intelligence, is actually the least developed of our intelligences. So when I'm working in producing content or thinking about how it is I want to go about things, I refer back to a model of the 4 intelligences, and they are your intuitive or your instinctual intelligence, your emotional intelligence, your physical intelligence, and your logical and intellectual intelligence. And all of these are really important. So it's not that one is more important than the other. And in parallel to that, they're all available to us. So it's not that none of us have intuition or instinct. Like, that's just not possible. As part of being human, you get that pass, you get that permission slip at birth. Here is your intuition. Here is your instinct. Use it wisely. But I think that a lot of what we are subjected to in terms of our cultural understanding, in terms of the way that our school system is developed and practiced, that logical intelligence is seen as the primary one that we want to develop. And if you think about the amount of times you have gone against your own instincts or gone against your own feeling in favor of the conditioned response, which comes as a secondary thought or a secondary understanding, this is how we start to turn off that flow, how we disconnect from the tap of intuition. So for instance, if you're out there working with your horse and you have this spark, this idea of, oh, maybe I should try this, or maybe I could do this, or maybe I could put my hand here or move our bodies in this particular direction. That comes seemingly out of nowhere. That's a function of our instinctual or our intuitive intelligence. And then you might have someone say, well, hang on a minute, let's think about that, or let's think this through. And we pollute that pure water with a diatribe of thoughts and, opinions about what it is we should be doing or could be doing or yada, yada, yada. And the lines become very blurry. So once again, just to reiterate, logic, thinking things through, planning, definitely not dirty words. It's just that we have promoted those at the expense of intuitive and emotional understanding. And as a consequence, those areas aren't thriving as a general rule in ourselves. And so how is it that we can bring them back? How is it that we can actually start to give attention to our intuition without it feeling really forced or contrived, which is, of course, is the opposite? And how is it that we can pay attention to our emotional selves? So not so we're ruled by our emotions, but so we are aware of them and able to action the physical intelligence that we have, the movement forward in the world in a very tangible way. So we're able to stay in touch with all of the aspects of ourselves and move from a really wholehearted and well-rounded place. So in the world according to Jane, my personal idea about intuition, emotions, and feelings is this. Emotions are essentially information that we gather from the outside world about what it means to be us in the environment or situation that we find ourselves in. So my neurology, my nervous system has a response to whatever it is I'm in right now, and the feedback that I get is an emotional one. So that is, my emotional body is an action requiring neurological messenger. It basically tells me what it is that I feel, what it is that is going on for me in relation to the situation that I find myself in. Now, emotions are essentially nouns. So we think of the anger, the confidence, the joy, the love. All of these types of emotional states we describe as almost permanent aspects of being, when of course they're naturally very fluid. So feeling then is the mechanism through which we experience emotion. The feeling state is the verb of emotion. It is the active participation of sensation of everything that is going on in our bodies in response to the emotion that we're feeling. So I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling loved, I'm feeling confident. All of these types of things convey, or all those descriptions convey, that there's actually something going on in our physical bodies, in our somatic body, that is demonstrating we're in the midst of an emotional experience. Those two things then are directly reflective of our interpretation, interaction, and engagement with the outside world. So something that is going on around us. Intuition, however, is intrinsically generated. It is coming from the inside. It is tapping into that deep pool of knowing and trust within us. And because it is coming from that place, in order for us to express it, we have to feel like the container, if you like, that we're operating in is actually able to hold what it is that we're bringing forward. So what I mean by that is, if you are free to follow your instincts, if you're free to follow your intuition, in the first instance, you have a sense of trust in yourself that is something that you're happy to do. And you feel like you're able to express that in the environment that you're in. And when you're not in alignment with those two things, when you either don't trust yourself or you've lost that trust in yourself, or the situation isn't supportive of you actually being expressive of that, then we see a shutdown. With our horses, we have this incredible gift that they present us with, in that this logical framework, this thinking, forward planning framework that comes from our prefrontal cortex, is not really of interest to them. What they're picking up directly is our energetic, emotional, somatic body that is demonstrating how it is we feel to be in relationship with them and in the environment that we're in. And so the ways of functioning that serve us so well in the outside world become obsolete in many instances when we go to work with them. And it can be that you can get to a certain place with your horses by applying logic, by applying like a very point-by-point, bullet point plan. But as many of you will know who've been in the game for long enough, there is an end point to that. Because without instinct, without intuition, without being able to tap into that part of yourself that allows you to be fluid with your experience and be receptive to the same from someone or something else, such as your horse, you need to have a level of introspection and interoception, which is something that we're going to get into now, in order to be able to process that information and to be good with it. So interoception is something that's not often mentioned or talked about. Proprioception is something that probably you're more likely to have heard about. And proprioception relates to how it is your body navigates itself in space. So as I'm sitting here on my chair, my proprioceptive awareness tells me how it is I'm oriented according to the room, according to my desk, according to what it is that's going on around me. And that proprioceptive awareness is developed by spatial awareness and through also instinctual awareness, by having a sense of the things that are behind me, of being able to soften my eyes and see the things that are out to the side and in front of me. And all of those things actually tap into that proprioceptive awareness. So someone with very limited proprioceptive awareness, or, you might even just call it self-awareness, is kind of not really understanding of where it is they're placing their body. And it might be that they're clumsy or kind of bashing into you because they haven't been given that sense of autonomy also to be able to say, this is where I stand in relation to everything else, and this is how I'm going to move through space in relation to everything else. That's also something that you'll see with horses who have been trained in a way where there's no clear delineation between pressure and release, meaning that, if I'm leading my horse and I'm constantly holding on to the halter, after a period of time, that sense of me and them as autonomous figures becomes increasingly blurred because they're never really able to experience a sense of self in relation to how it is I'm leading them. And so you'll find that they're kind of like knocking you out easily, or they're in your bubble because you haven't ever clearly delineated what your bubble is and what their bubble is. And so the lines start to get really blurred. Interoception then is the lesser known sister. And that is really the sense that helps you understand what's going on inside your own body. So your interoceptive sense is the one that tells you when you're hungry. It tells you when you need to go to the toilet. It tells you when you're cold or hot or when you're thirsty. Like all of these basic functions are a process of interoception. And as well, they tell us what our internal boundaries are. Interoception tells us whether we feel good about a decision or not, whether we want to engage something or not. But also there is a slightly even less tangible quality, if that's even possible, which is that spark of inspiration, or that knowing that can't be attached to something specific or explainable or tangible, that just really asks you to follow your own curiosity. One of the analogies that I use when I'm talking to riders about developing about developing intuition, well, same but different, is pretending that your intuition is like having a small child next to you the entire time. And if you've never asked that child for their opinion, or actually never welcomed their opinion, then it's not surprising that you'll never hear from them, right? After a while, that becomes a very subdued and dejected child at your side. But then if one day you say, okay, actually what I want to be doing is developing this sense of self, this sense of knowing, and be brave enough to start to trust myself and follow that, I'm going to ask this little version of me to have a voice. And so when I start to make decisions, or I feel a flicker of something which I might register as intuition, I will say, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? And if you think about literally asking a child or asking anyone that's never been allowed to have a voice, that's never expressed their voice, that question, probably what you're going to get in response is not much in the first instance. They'll be quiet, or they'll be shocked, or they'll be dumbfounded, but they're not going to give you a long answer. And it's probably not going to be instant either. So it doesn't mean that you stop asking the question. It just means that you understand that this is going to be a process of reconnecting and of repairing the relationship until it feels like that voice is something that is allowed to come to the surface. It's always there, right? And it might be actually the opposite, where you have this actual megaphone in the background of voices or feeling or sensation, or however it is being communicated to you, that's telling you that this is not the right situation, or this is the right situation, or, this is often described in the case of creative impulses, where someone is naturally really drawn to a particular creative affinity or creative line of work, and they've instead gone into a very, mechanistic way of working, and that voice never dims. Like, there's always this desire, which is then translated as kind of a sense of dejection, or just lack of, a sense of despondency about what it is that they're doing. And the same with our horses. I think it's very easy, and I see this time and time again, and it's certainly something that I've gone through as well. So I'm not saying that I'm like separate to this, or am some kind of enlightened being, far from it. But when you follow a trainer or you train with someone, and then you almost, in order to really understand a system of training, or to get into the principles of what it is that you're doing, you have to, in a sense, give yourself over to that. Like, you really immerse yourself in that. And that, I think, is a very natural process of learning. But through that, it's very easy to give up all sense of self and all sense of play also. So we get kind of stuck in this rigid system. And we might even be noticing that more than ever at the moment, where because of lockdowns and restrictions, those of us that are able to work with our horses, or will be returning to work with our horses in the near future, we may not have the training frameworks around us that we're used to operating within. And so that feels really scary. You don't feel like you can trust yourself to actually work with your horse outside of a very structured situation. And to me, that's a problem, because we need to be able to play. We need to be able to make our own decisions, and we need to realize that if we don't feel like that's happening, we're not actually in conversation. We are in a dialogue with someone on the outside who's telling us what to do, and we're not being totally responsive to what's going on. I mean, I know this is a very general way of talking about things, but you can see what I mean by this. If you feel like there's a level of concern about doing your own thing with your horse, I'm interested to know where that comes from and what that means. And if you do feel like you're able to kind of like break outside the framework and have that be okay. For me, playing at liberty with my horse is a really great way of kind of loosening the shackles. You realize how you've got stuck in certain ways of processing things. You've come to the arena with a certain expectation, or with a certain train of thought about producing a very specific outcome. And when that's gone, it can be actually really unsettling. You kind of don't know what to do. And you also realize how linked your sense of success is to productivity, or to being able to produce a certain outcome. And so I think that's a really great undoing process, and one that can challenge certainly the type A personalities amongst us to kind of get in there and mix it up a little bit in ways that we might not be used to. So the first part of developing intuition is really learning to follow your own impulses, really learning to follow your curiosity. And I'm not suggesting you put yourself in unsafe positions, far from it, but in very basic circumstances, like when you're doing body work, or you're starting to explore different aspects of body work with your horse, which is completely possible. The bladder meridian's a really great example of this. Or you're just out there in a way where you'd kind of like to relax and play together. follow the sense of what comes up for you. Like, allow yourself to follow your curiosity. And I think if you can replace the word intuition, especially if you're thinking about how do I develop it and like I want to be more intuitive, that feels like a lot. Like we actually move away from intuition by desperately trying to be more intuitive. But if you can think instead of following your curiosity, that to me is a much more beautiful, a much more soft way of coming about the same conversation that essentially takes you to the same place. I noticed when I was out there with Nadia, my chestnut mare, that I started to do one thing and then I was really drawn to placing my hand on her forehead. And I placed it there and I just worked on really relaxing my own body and kind of like being in the space that I wanted to create for both of us. And she really let down and released, and it was a really lovely thing. And so I sort of played around her face, not in any way that was that I knew what I was doing, quote unquote, but where I just felt like it was right to apply the principles that I knew in different aspects of bodywork to these areas that I was working with there, and the results were really beautiful. So that was a really cool example for me of following your own intuition. But on a very basic level, if we go back to this idea of interoception, meaning, the triggers that tell us when we're hungry, when we're hot, when we're cold, when we need to go to the toilet, we deny those in so many ways. The social conditioning that we have been brought up with has told us when it's appropriate to go to the toilet, has told us when we need to eat, or when we're, when enough's enough, by actually the frameworks that are set up of these different institutions that we're a part of. So if you think of being at school, you might have had a rule of like, well, there's already someone in the toilet, there's only one person at a time, or you have to wait till the end of class to go to the toilet. And so this denial of a very basic impulse is there from a very young age. As an adult, you might deny that by thinking you have this social conditioning and etiquette, if you like, that's like, oh, I'm really busting to go to the loo, but it's not appropriate for me to leave right now because I don't want to upset the person talking, or I don't want to look like it's rude. So you can see how we start on the gross level, on the macro level, to deny these basic impulses, and then we wonder why we're kind of stranded on logic island and caught up in our heads island and are unable to follow these more intuitive impulses that come. So my challenge that I'm putting out there over the next little while, if this is something that interests you, to really start just following your own impulses, to say, well, if I'm hot, did I notice I was hot like 10 minutes ago and I still haven't taken off my jacket? Or have I been sitting here working for an hour when actually I knew that I needed to go to the toilet? Or I feel really cold and yet I'm kind of putting up with that when it would be really easy for me to go and put a jumper on. So something that allows us to tune into our natural impulses, to make sure that we're starting to listen to ourselves and to be honoring that process. We also know when it comes to food just how messy this whole situation can be, and how perhaps overt the conditioning is, that as something as simple as eating when you're hungry, how inappropriate that can feel to your mind, and you actually override the natural impulses of your body that are telling you need to eat or you need to stop eating, or, and so on and so forth. So just think of this as following your own curiosity. And that might be when you're working with your horse, how does this feel? Or what if I was to try this? Or if you just get a sense when you're going around that actually maybe if I did this, it would mobilize this a little bit more, or it would feel really good to move in this way. Try it out. Give yourself permission to follow your curiosity and see what the result is. It's not a pass-fail test, like I say. The second point of the first point, the B point, is to start to tune into your impulses, to develop your sense of interoception, to recognize as you move throughout your day how it is that you feel, so that you're not getting to the end of the day and kind of collapsing on the couch and going, wow, my shoulders are so sore, I didn't even realize how tight they were. A really classic example of this is when you do some kind of practice, like a meditation practice, or you go to some kind of yoga class or something that's kind of has a relaxation focus, and you're asked to go internally. It's interesting how much stuff comes up that you weren't even aware of. You're like, wow, my neck's really sore, or like stuff like that. And also how we go to the negative. So there's also like a sense of spaciousness that exists in your body. There's also good feeling that exists in your body, but we tend to kind of go for the murky stuff first. The second thing is to really be aware of your boundaries. And how do boundaries feed into your intuition? Well, boundaries are that same kind of interoception, perhaps on a slightly different level, which is all about following your impulses to say yes or to say no to something, to express something or to not express something. All of these things are functions of our instinct or of our intuitive selves. And so it's really interesting to me, and I have a policy with myself that when I say yes, I want it to be a full-ass yes. And if I say no, I want it to be a full-ass no. Meaning that if someone asks me to do something and I really don't want to do it, I see that as a dishonoring not only of myself, but also of the other person to say yes to that task. If I say yes to something, I want there to be a full investment of myself in that thing. And if there's not, I want to recognize that the choice has been made for me to be there by me. And so I choose to show up in the best way possible. So those internal boundaries are really important. And I think that it doesn't have to be pressurized situations where we find ourselves denying what it is that we want to actually say, whether we actually want to say yes, whether we actually want to say no. And it can be as simple as in clinic situations or with teachers or in different learning settings where you actually have a question, but you don't speak up. So following that impulse involves, I have a question, my question is valid and important, and I have a voice, so I'm going to use it. So you can see how we get really dampened down, how our intuition gets really dampened down, and our voice gets really dampened down, and it's a product of layer upon layer of denying our own impulses. So after a while, we get cut off at the head and we reject what it is that's going on. Not only do we reject it, we aren't even aware of it until we actually step back into the space of going, It can often be afterwards as well that you recognize what it is that you actually felt, meaning that you know how you say, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to do that. And then 2 hours later, you're like, why did I say yes to that? I meant no. And then you have this whole energy of resentment or whatever it is that comes up that kind of makes the yes a half-assed yes, which nobody really wants. So practice speaking up, practice using your voice or not, if that's in alignment with how it is you actually feel. Practice saying no when you mean no. Practice saying yes when you mean yes. And use all of these ways of going about the world as really recognizing that this is how we start to tune into the much more subtle versions of ourselves, the much more sensitive parts of ourselves. It's really, some of us have naturally more sensitivities than others in different areas. So some of us have more developed skills in other areas. And it's really about finding balance within that. So, if you've developed this hyper sensitivity as a means of kind of defense or as a trauma response to something that's going on, then we want to bring that back down. And if you've started to develop this very muted sense where you're kind of disconnected or numb, then we want to resensitize your system. So there's a balance that's always very individually dependent, but a lot of the time, these basic things that I'm mentioning are the way that we kind of get that back. The next thing is body movement. And I think of this in relation to my horses and to myself. And when I'm talking about movement, I mean instinctual or natural movement for the body. I did a Facebook Live session with two of my favorite people in the world, Kathy Price and Tanya Kindersley, this morning. And I talked about an experience about moving my body in ways that felt good to me. And I'll give you a little bit of the backstory. So when I'm talking about following your own impulses in terms of following your own body, I'm talking about actually getting into a place where you feel like you can move your body in a very unstructured way. And I've seen dancers do this, or I've seen people put on music or just get on the yoga mat and kind of groove around. And I've always really admired that, but found it personally quite difficult because I've been in very structured forms of exercise or movement my entire life. And so I've tried that in a way that is kind of like, oh, what if I was to move my hip this way? Well, that feels weird. And I felt very self-conscious doing it. But everything that I talk about and share with you and teach, I'm basically my own experiment. So I don't send it out there. Sometimes I do if I've got a good vibe about it, but I don't really send it out there without trying it on for size myself. And this is something that I'm really keen on as well, kind of like embodiment and developing intuition so that when I'm in the arena or I'm with my horses, I'm not stuck in my head. I'm in the space and I'm present and I'm here. So yesterday, it was really, really rainy. We're in lockdown. So both of the boys had been with me for a while, and I literally felt like I was crawling out of my skin by the end of the day because I hadn't done anything really movement based. And so I got my yoga mat out. I was like, dudes, knock yourself out. I'm going to do some yoga. And I felt myself spontaneously feel the need to kind of move in different ways to what it was that I normally would and have. And it wasn't a thought process. It wasn't like, here I am trying to be super mover right now. I was just like, there wasn't anything, really out there, but I felt myself just sort of like opening into different joints in different ways and moving my arms and moving my legs in different ways. And it just felt really good. And it also felt very natural. It didn't feel like I was trying to be something that I wasn't. It didn't feel like I was kind of stuck in this space of self-consciousness as I did it either. It was just very natural and it felt very liberating. And there was a couple of things that happened over the course of yesterday that just made me realize that I've kind of, all of the little bits that I'm dripping into my day to open up my awareness and kind of open up the capacity to hold different energies is really working. And that was a really cool thing to experience. So the third aspect is about free movement. Like, how often do you move in ways that just feel good to you, that aren't about exercise or like following a pattern or following a routine, that just simply are for the sake of being. It's the same for our horses. Like, I guess in the paddock, they're much more inclined, or naturally they're inclined to follow their own ways of moving. But when we're playing together with them, like, how often do we actually play with them? How often do we allow for spontaneous movement without either being afraid of it or attaching a meaning to it, or feeling like if we see them, behave in a way that's kind of flamboyant and out there, that we're immediately superimposing that situation into a riding scenario and so on and so forth. So it's like, how good are you, and how good are you at, not good in terms of like, are you good at this, but how available are you to be able to play and kind of explore in that way, and do the same for your horse? How comfortable are you with that? Or do you feel that as soon as you get outside a boxed parameter, that it's really not an okay zone to be in? Yeah, I love this. I love this topic, and I really encourage you to explore it, because it's not a luxury. This is not something that is like, oh, that would be kind of nice, but it's not really necessary. When we tune out this part of ourselves, there are consequences. It's not that these energies, or it's not that these thoughts and feelings and sensations don't exist. They are absolutely there. It's just that we're not aware of them. And so when we deny them, we either deny the fullness of what it is that we're able to be, we deny a level of relationship to our horse that is, I believe, truly sublime, and we also shut off a part of ourselves that allows us to not only experience, a greater capacity to be present, but a greater capacity to hold joy and to hold happiness, and to be able to say, this is how it is that I want to be in the world, and this is my voice, and it's important, and this is the expression that I'm going to offer to my horse, so that we're actually moving into something creative and artistic and relational, as opposed to functional and kind of ticking boxes. So play with it, play with following your curiosity, if nothing else. Give yourself the permission to actually develop your own intuition and to honor it, and just see where it takes you. Super, super fun. All right, guys, I'd love you to feed back to me if you found this useful. And if you can share the podcast episodes, I'd be super grateful. That is absolutely the best thing you can do for me. If you want to learn more, confidentrider.online is the place to find me. And of course, my membership program is there /joyride at the same place. Is a great place to be. And we are doing so much stuff now. We've got spotlight sessions happening each week, and we're actually getting a lot into the nervous system and all of this stuff that I'm talking about. So come join us if that's your bag. Catch you on the flip side. Look after you, please.